Hello and welcome to another edition of DCU Daily. And today we are talking about the Authority. The Authority is well a set of characters that had a tumultuous history throughout the history of DC Comics. They weren't even part of DC Comics proper for quite some time. Originally, they were their own label under I think Wildstorm Comics, and then they sort of got bought out and then mixed in and then unmixed, and then it's been a jumbled mess. But then I think, as of today, they are part of the picture. And then today, to tell us all about it, I've also got John with me, and we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about how James Gunn is potentially looking to integrate these guys, into the new DCU, because we have never quite seen the Wildstorm characters, especially the Authority, like be a part of the mainline DC story, especially in a cinematic universe. So or live action anything really. So John, you're you're here with us today to kind of give us a lot of insight on this, and also I'm very curious to see what your thoughts are on where these sets of characters are going to go with the new DCU, because James Gunn has already cast at least one member of the Authority. So we sort of have an idea of, like how the pieces might mesh together. So maybe
Right.
we can, gain some insight into what the plans are. So where do you want to start?
I think you pretty much got the origin of Wildstorm. It was under Image, created by Jim Lee in '92. Got wasn't selling very well, so it went to DC Comics. It was bought out by DC Comics in '98. They got shut down, and then they got rebooted along with everything else in Flashpoint. Became part of the DC universe, and then they became standalone again. And now, as of recently, with Superman and the Authority, which we'll be getting into later, they are part. It seems like they're part of the DC universe now, but who knows? Continuity has never been a strong suit of comic books, so who
Continuity
knows at this
schmontinuity,
point. Um,
like the Fox universe.
oh yeah, let's not get into that. But yeah, so the Authority was, well, kind of the precursor to the Authority was Stormwatch, and Stormwatch was a UN sanctioned super team. And they would just like go on missions. They would just have like a different brand of justice, that kind of thing. So, being able to do what others couldn't, and so they were fighting for a while, and Warren Ellis was eventually brought onto the book, and he just didn't feel like it was right for him. He's like, this book isn't selling, why am I writing for it? Turns out the employees of Wildstorm liked reading it, but the people didn't. So he's like, what? I felt terrible, like, why do I need to write for this? So he was like, okay, so let me start with something new. So after the crossover with Aliens, as in the franchise Aliens, most of Stormwatch was killed off by xenomorphs. So then he rebranded them into the Authority. So Warren Ellis could start his own team, and do whatever he wanted without being, caught into somebody else's creation. So essentially, what the Authority is a team that is not afraid to get their hands dirty. They aren't, unlike Stormwatch, they're not sanctioned by the UN. They kind of do their own thing, but they work with them from time to time. But for the most part, they're their own thing. And they have 7 members, just like, that's the magic number, I guess. Uh, the magic 7 number. And so the characters in this case are Jenny Sparks, who's the leader of the team, and she can generate and turn into electricity. And she's also defined as the spirit of the 20th century, although they might have to change that for, this upcoming reboot. Jack Hawksmoor, which definitely has one of the most interesting power sets I've ever seen. He can psychically bond with cities and communicate with them and receive powers from them. And no, before you ask, this guy was not created by Frank Miller and his weird building fetish. Totally different guy. So you have that, and then you have Swift, who is a character who has wings and sharp talons. Apollo and Midnighter, who are pastiches of Superman and Batman, but they kill and don't have as much of a strict moral code. And also they're a couple. So then the one character that has been cast is the engineer who we mentioned before, who has nanotech in her blood and can create solid objects with that metal and like create her own like weird suit. And I think I mentioned before, one of us mentioned at least that she's kind of like the T-1000, so that's definitely going to look really cool on screen.
Yeah, but
Uh,
do you think like let me quickly ask you a question there. Do you think it's
yeah,
gonna
sure.
be T1000 esque, or is they're gonna lean more towards the Iron Man nanotech armor version that we
That
got in
could be
like
the case.
Endgame and
I
Infinity?
think they might lean into T-1001 because T-1000 is just fucking awesome. So
Yeah,
people
well
love
that's
the
true. Yeah.
T-1000, and I don't think they want to lean into Iron Man because then people will yell at them for stealing that idea. And like be like, oh, that's repetitive. You can't don't steal from Iron Man. So I think they might try to lean away from that and try to lean more into T-1000 stuff, because I just think that's an overall cooler look.
Yeah.
And I feel like Marvel fans would be pissed, like, oh, you're ripping off Iron Man. And, that's,
Right.
and
Yeah.
I don't think James Gunn wants, even though he's the man of both sides, I don't think he wants to deal with that. So he's like, I think he'll lean into the like cooler idea of that. So yeah, then the final character is the Doctor. No, not the one you're thinking of. And he is a shaman with the powers of like generations of other shamans before him. And
So
he's
but
also
he's not Doctor Fate.
no, not Dr. Fate and not Doctor Who either. Unfortunately,
Okay.
he's Dutch. He's not English. He's also a drug addict,
Yeah.
so that's
Okay.
kind
Oh
of
wow.
cool.
Yeah.
um, so their headquarters is called the Carrier, which is this giant floating building ship thing that is in the space between spaces called the Bleed. And so they can use that to transport into like any place on Earth and I think in the universe by just saying door and they'll like appear there. So it's a really cool team. It's definitely very like 90s, just like that 90s like extreme, like everything was extreme back then. There's like a lot of adult stuff, like people are swearing, gore, sex, like that kind of thing. So and eventually, like way later on, they eventually took over the government, but that's beside the point. I don't think that'll happen anytime soon. Just like a weird little tidbit. So in terms of the film, so now we have all this information. Everyone knows what the authority is now. Okay, so what to do for the film? Now, many people have joked that the authority is to get the boys audience, which I would be it's technically correct, where it's like, okay, it's like that more extreme sort of like people with no moral code. It's kind of gory. But here's the thing, I don't think it should be The Boys. I don't think it should just be DC's The Boys, even though technically The Boys is DC. You know how it is with imprints and what who owns what and that kind of thing. Um, but I think they shouldn't do just like, oh, this is our version of The Boys, because that's just one, it's just repetitive. Like we've already have this show, it's still going. We just recently got a spinoff. It's just like why you don't need to like just do that again. We don't need like The Boys again. And the thing is, the problem with The Boys is that I just think it can kind of be a little bit too edgy at points, a little bit like too like just like that sort of like, oh, we're not mainstream, we're cool, kind of meta commentary kind of thing. Not as far as like Deadpool, but like it kind of bleeds into that where it's like,
Right.
oh, look, we're not like hoity-toity good guys, blue boy scout shit. We're cool, you know. Like
Oh, they're not Looney Tunes.
yeah, like, oh, we have Soldier Boy and he kills people. He's like Captain America, but cooler. Like not to knock The Boys. The Boys is a good
Right.
show. It's just like I don't think they should just copy that. They shouldn't just copy
Right.
that. What I think the movie should be, it should be, this is going to be a weird comparison, but I recently watched I didn't watch the whole thing, but I watched like a bunch of it, and I'm like, okay, we need to get a movie like this again. I would love to see if we got like a team version for the Authority, if it was like the Punisher Warzone, which is like 80s excess to the extreme, and it's ridiculous. Like, I think we need to, like, have something like that where it's just like it's like Commando, where it's like just like this sort of like action, like an hardcore 80s
Yeah.
action movie.
Have you ever seen the Universal Soldier movies?
No, but I am aware of them. Yeah.
Like there are, dude. That okay. I watched the first one when I was way too young and like probably not even. I think like in my preteens, and that shit scared me to my bone for like a couple of days, and because of how hardcore those movies are, like nobody is safe. The blood and gore and like the gruesome, grueling way in which like people like they kill
Yeah.
off characters and such. And then of course there's a lot of jump scares and stuff like that too. So yeah, I get that. Like that would be quite the vibe, and that would
Yeah.
definitely stand out from like if, as far as like differentiating yourself from what's come before in the
Yeah.
superhero genre. Like the genre has explored so many areas already over the last
Exactly.
20 or so years alone. That at this point people might be wondering, oh, where else can they go? Well, this is a great place to go, and I think with James Gunn, you can do it while even though he may not be the one directing it, like you can probably still do it without necessarily going into that territory of like it's very pulpy and maybe not, you know, gonna attract a large audience
Yeah.
because he
More
did something
visceral.
similar with Guardians, not Guardians, but the Suicide Squad. And even though that movie completely bombed at the box office, I think it was more to do with the pandemic than it had to do with the movie being what it was, because the critics and audiences that did see it loved it. So
Yeah.
I think there's precedent there that it, plus, like if you look at the writing team that they've got over at DC and some of the other creators, directors that are already involved, it looks like while some fans might be disappointed that we're moving away from Zack Snyder's vision, which was this darker, grittier, maybe like more grounded. I don't think James Gunn is like out here trying to take us into Marvel land, which I think is a
Yeah.
common misconception,
I don't
because
think
he's of
yeah,
course
I don't think
had
that's
you
the
know
case.
which yeah, and but like you only have to look at the Suicide Squad. Like it was a rated R movie, and the amount of stuff he did. I mean, granted, there was some stuff that was maybe a little too gratuitous. Like I did not appreciate some of the jokes or humor that was in the movie, but I did like a lot of it. So yes, there's some things might not connect, but I mean, all in all, I think James Gunn has shown. And also, if you look at beyond just the three Marvel movies that he has done, his other filmography, the movies that he worked on before Marvel, tell you that this guy is like, he works on some dark stuff. I think he wrote like he was one of the credited writers on Dawn of the Dead that Zack Snyder
Yeah.
directed back in the early 2000s. So there's a connection there between the two. And clearly, if you go by, James Gunn's overall filmography, it sort of leans more heavily into the gritty, darker, and like you said, these characters, one of them is a drug addict. There's like guys who are like much more they would fit into the boys universe much more easily than they would into like your traditional DC and Marvel universes. But at the same time, I think there's some of the imperfections, let's call them, or like character flaws that they bring to the table are things that not only do we not see from a lot of those other mainstream DC and Marvel heroes, but which gives you more creative opportunities to try something different. But I think when you then mesh them together with those DC heroes that are the mainstream heroes, it gives those heroes something new to new challenges to kind of tackle. And like how do you like you face a villain whose like biggest character flaw is that he's just a drug addict, and ultimately like that's one of those things that's going to drive his actions. Again, I'm speculating a little bit because I don't know as much about these characters, but I'm
Right.
speculating like as a writer I would be thinking there's new things I can do here that are not just about let's kill off one of the parents of the superhero, and that's what drives him. And then one of his love interests gets in the way, and like the traditional tropes of like your superhero secret, your secret identity, your alter ego, like how that affects people. Like we're getting away from a little bit of that and getting a little more visceral with some of these other things that you mentioned. And I really like just hearing about it right now. I'm like, this is clearly different, and I think
Yeah.
different is exactly what audiences are looking for in 2024. So I'm glad that James Gunn like is aware of that, and that's the direction that we're going in.
Yeah, because it seems like we're getting like a different genre with every film. Like you get Superman Legacy, which is like more like we're getting more like an action adventure vibe. The Authority seems more like a visceral like action movie, or at least what I think they should do with it. Like have like that visceral 80s action, but also like have like those human elements, not necessarily adult elements, because I think like it's one thing to like have like 80s excess in terms of like the action, but like I don't think it should go the boys route either in terms of like character interactions where like everyone is just saying fuck in every other word, or
Right.
like there's like an over gratuitous amount of gore. And don't get me wrong, I like that, but I think just to differentiate, and I think just to make it more interesting to just go in that direction, because I think that would just be overall more interesting. And like you could have like
Yeah.
just like normal human stuff, just not a gratuitous
Yeah.
amount. Like you could have sex, like you can have blood, you can have, swearing, just to have it so much is just like, okay, this is just
Yeah.
annoying at this point.
Well, because like just for example, like with the X-Men universe alone, like I mean, yeah, the early movies were sort of like very much on the straight and narrow of what superhero movies are typically known for. But once they really opened the door with Deadpool, like you can look at two very different flavors of rated R between the Deadpool movies and Logan, and
Yeah.
both of them, had different levels of like violence and like blood splatters and all that stuff, and they also had like different variations of nudity, I suppose. Like there was like this one shot in Logan, and then like Deadpool has like an entire sequence worth. And then of course, like the language wise too, like in Deadpool there's a lot of f-bombs and stuff, whereas in Logan it felt like it was much more like restrained, the use of like gratuitous language. So
Hmm.
and yet both movies are rated R, and both kind of tackle like mature subject matter, but like Deadpool is totally a comedy, whereas Logan is very much a western. So that there is giving us a pretty good template. Plus, like even if you
Yeah.
just look at again the Suicide Squad from James Gunn, and you look at some of the other DCEU movies, like on one end you got Shazam, and then you got the Suicide Squad, and they're two very different things. And I mean, well, I guess they were meant to exist in the same universe, even though the characters never crossed over. I can imagine like they can pull that off, and
Yeah.
it's not
Easily.
unprecedented. So yeah,
Yeah, and then like it's just really cool with like the variety, as we've mentioned a bunch of times before. Like just the Authority is just another piece in the puzzle in terms of like the variety. Like Supergirl, if they're like straight adapting, or at least adapting many aspects of that Tom King series, is going to be very cosmic. So I'm like, okay, that's really cool. Swamp Thing brings a horror element, so it's all like really interesting, and like how like they can play this. They could play it like a whole bunch of different ways. Remember we were saying yesterday about how like Maxwell Lord, they can like treat like the Authority as like Justice League International, and like just use different components. Another way they could use different components, because I remember seeing a video on this way back when like the Authority was like first announced with all the other movies, is they might bring in like Manchester Black into the Authority, because that's just such a popular character, and he kind of just fits in with that, as well as the fact he was part of the Grant Morrison limited series Superman and the Authority, which brought like the Wildstorm characters back into the DC universe. And so I think what they might be doing is they're combining. Now, again, this is all just like theories and like what ifs and that kind of thing. But it seems like what they could do, not only make the Authority like a Justice League International with Maxwell Lord making that team, but also bringing in elements from the Elite and the famous comic book story, What's So Funny About Truth, Justice, and the American Way, as well as the film, Superman versus the Elite, kind of bringing that in as well. Maybe not like totally, but just kind of like elements of like, butting heads with Superman and just having like that different form of justice. Is just like, I think they could do like a lot of like really good, interesting stuff with this. And I think personally, what I would like to see is just like not a repeat of The Boys, like not a repeat of Watchmen either. Like just try to like go as different as you possibly can, and not just. And although it would be interesting to see like the Authority as protagonists, and then have like Superman as the antagonist, but like not like the bad guy, obviously, because there is a differentiation. A lot of people, feel like that they're the same. It was like a villain and an antagonist, or like a good guy and a protagonist. It's not that cut and dry. So I think it could be definitely really interesting to see, um, just like all these elements like work. And I think you could get like a really good director to really and a writer to really do that, like get someone like more like into like visceral stuff. No way would it ever happen, but I think a good director would be like S. Craig Zoller. He's like very good with like visceral, um like brutal like stuff, um but not like in a Zack Snyder way, but like he's like kind of has that brutal visceral vibe, but
Well,
like
yeah, I mean,
a
like
little bit over
Peacemaker,
exaggeration. Yeah.
maybe like that could be a good reference, right? Maybe like what they did in Peacemaker, what they've
Yeah, maybe.
done in the Suicide Squad in
Less
some ways,
comedy,
where
I think.
yeah, yeah, less comedy, a little, yeah, more visceral for sure, but less comedy. Maybe even some of the sequences in like the Batman, like I think there was
Yeah.
a lot of there was a lot of noir elements to the Batman, but I can definitely appreciate that you're gonna get these characters in here, and it's not just that you're getting something where it's um it's going to be serious and tackling these different topics. And it feels to me like we're sort of almost talking about the Watchmen in some ways, although I know that's like a whole other can of worms
Mhm.
that we don't necessarily want to do. But definitely, like you said, like the stuff like that we saw in the Batman. Like I'm not saying we need to go that dark or like gothic and stuff like that, but I feel like some of that kind of like whether it's street level or cosmic level
Mhm.
of fight sequences and stuff. Obviously, James Gunn already has done Guardians of the Galaxy, where you've got a lot of that cosmic stuff, but at the same time, there was some street level action in those movies too, because not every member of the team was like cosmically powerful. In fact, most of them weren't. So when you compare like those past projects, both in the Marvel verse and the DC verse, like you got some references there to work from, and I really
Mhm.
appreciate that because it gives me a sense of like where we're going. Like just the fact that they live on a freaking ship that's like in a slip between time. What like they're basically at a jump drive and they kind of live in like some form of phantom space, and they come out of that into wherever they need to go. I'm like that automatically gives them like a whole different edge and scope of like where they can show up and what they can do versus like the Justice League, especially any version of the Justice League you've ever seen in live action, because you've yet to see that space station that the Justice League should deservedly have. Like they've never quite gone that far in live action, and I loved it in the animated series. But yeah, so I really like the setup, the store, the potential stories they can cover, the way
Mhm.
they've been already sort of positioned, or at least what we think how they've been positioned in Superman Legacy. And from your side, like just to kind of wrap things up, like if you were walking away from the Authority as a movie in a theater, and let's say in a few years' time, what would you have liked to have seen happen? I mean, not, of course, not knowing what is going to happen in Superman Legacy, I guess we'd have a lot of speculation to do. But what is the one or two things that you definitely would like to see in that solo movie for the Authority that we're going to get?
Well, I would like to see any of my theories come true because then I could be like stuff it in everyone's faces and say I told you so. But I don't know. I just feel like there's like a lot of really good ideas that we've both of us have brought up that could just be like really good. Like just like have like 80s excess like action, like stuff like Commando and First Blood Part 2, and like just like this heavy, super heavy action of like guys with no shirt just fucking shit up because they can. I think that vibe would like be really awesome for an Authority movie. And like
Yeah,
something that we really haven't got in like this, like, don't get me wrong, we've gotten a lot of great action movies. The Mission Impossible is still pumping out like great movie after great movie, but I would
yeah,
love to see like that 80s excess, but specifically not have it be a meta commentary, because meta commentary is just getting way too annoying and old now. It's just getting repetitive. Like everyone is doing it, kind of like how everyone's doing multiverse stuff. It's like, okay, we're kind of sick of it at this point because,
yeah,
corporation takes the thing that a couple people like and then like overblow it, and then now it's tired. So like having like a meta commentary, a wink and a nod to everything that's done in the movie, it's just old. It's boring at this
yeah.
point. So I think like just playing it straight in terms of like 80s excess in terms of the action side would be awesome. And then having it be and then having human elements, not adult elements, human elements. Like I don't want to see like don't get me wrong, a lot of people like sex. Like, it's fun. Like but like I don't want to see 12
Understatement of
sex
the
scenes
year.
back to back in the
Yeah.
movie. Like and
Yeah.
then like somebody having like a blood orgy. It's like, okay, I don't need to see all this.
I don't
Like
think that's gonna happen in the
I don't think that's gonna happen either, but, like,
Yeah.
sometimes people can get,
Yeah.
like, into like, that like, I want excess in terms of the action, I don't want excess like, I want, like, human elements, like a guy dealing with a drug addiction, someone dealing with, like, being, like, this idea of what, like, the what spirit like they should like the whole Jenny Sparks spirit of the 20th century thing, like being in touch with that, like what does that mean? Like just like diving into these human elements. And I think like and like sometimes just treating their lives like how we treat our lives, just like every day. Like it like sure, okay, some persons having sex, but like don't treat it like a big to do. It's just like, oh, a thing that happens because we like to do it. Or somebody like just drinking a beer, or like just somebody, or even like kind of like what the X-Men movies did at a lot of points, just treating their powers like, just something that's sometimes a convenience. I think there was a famous scene in like X2 where Wolverine gets like a soda because there's no beer around because you can't show beer in a PG-13 movie. And so and it was warm, so he hands it to Iceman blows on it, it gets cold, and then he drinks it. Like stuff like that. Like I would love to see like that like human element to like people with superpowers and how they like I don't know, maybe the engineer who's, our nanotech lady, she is like just walking uh walking down like a hallway or something, and she I don't know, she just uses her powers for, like, to, like maybe there's, like, a tight fitting door and, like, she uses her powers to, like, I don't know, open it further or just something silly like that. Just, like, show what we as humans would actually do. Like, a lot of people say, like, "Oh, The Boys is what would actually happen if humans got powers." It's like, no, The Boys is what would happen if degenerate assholes got superpowers. Like, what would we actually do if we got superpowers? I would love to see that. So, the combination of action, of excess, like 80s, 90s extremism, and then like that human element that we don't really get a lot of in superhero movies nowadays. Like I think in combination of those would be awesome. I wouldn't mind seeing Superman as the antagonist, but I feel like if Superman Legacy was the previous film, I think that would be too much. So maybe like the antagonist is sort of like the Terrifics or something like that, or whatever, like because I know Mr. Terrific is a part of it. So like maybe he has a team and he's trying to do stuff and then they butt heads, or maybe there is some extraterrestrial threat. They could do that. Like the villain could be a lot of things, but mainly the main thing I want to see in terms of that team is like those two things that I keep mentioning, because I just think that's just too perfect in terms of the story. And I will say it again, don't copy The Boys. That's all I ask. Honestly, that's the end of it. Don't copy The Boys. Just don't do that, and you should be hunky dory. That's pretty much it.
Yeah, and you know what? To be perfectly honest, no matter which direction they go, there's gonna be comparisons made probably to movies like X-Men or Guardians of the Galaxy, because those are like, I think on the surface, similar properties, and also maybe even the Suicide Squad movies and stuff like that. So to me, I think the movie, given where it's going to be placed within chapter one and how they're positioning potentially the Authority as maybe the antithesis to the eventual Justice League of the DCU, I would love to kind of see the Authority play out as almost like a civil war kind of a movie, where it's a civil war amongst the team, and maybe like as a result of that civil war, like you have like a fracture in terms of philosophy. Like maybe the ends don't justify the means, and maybe that becomes a question for some of the members, because that tends to be the modus operandi of the Authority, that they don't care if they kill a few innocent bystanders along the way, as long as they get the job done. And of course they're in these imperfect people who have their own like personal character flaws and stuff like that. um I think like that kind of a movie would also would make for something far more interesting, because then you're really getting to explore these set of characters without necessarily leaning on a lot of the DC characters. Whereas, yeah, you can definitely have them kind of weave in and out of the story. I wouldn't necessarily like think that Superman would be like a big part of that movie potentially. However, I think that the movie should be set up as like a tragedy almost. That, the Civil War doesn't end with like the good guys, or like what we would perceive as the good guys winning, so that the authority then firmly becomes entrenched as like an antagonistic force in the world of the DCU by the end of that movie. And then moving forward, maybe either they develop into like the big bads of that uh, chapter one, or they're just one of those ongoing antagonistic forces that are the heroes of this universe have to confront over time. And that what I think creates something uniquely different. Plus, like, their whole vibe is like completely different from these other characters. I don't think we're gonna get the Watchmen in this new DCU, but I feel like the Watchmen are like also another flavor on the palette here that could like
Yeah.
end up giving us more variety. But definitely, I think the Authority is going to be something that we can all look forward to. We don't yet know when this movie is meant to come out, who the director is going to be. We do know that they've got a roadmap in mind, and obviously they probably by that uh, by via that you could kind of insinuate that they know where the Authority is positioned within the larger DCU picture for Chapter One, Gods and Monsters. But what exactly happens in the movie, they probably don't even they probably have a rough outline. They probably have some bullet points that they have like, all right, we need to do
Mhm.
this, and this with this to move forward the larger narrative. But I think some of the details will probably be left up to the director of the movie and whoever they're asked to come on board as a writer. And when that happens, we'll see what comes of it. I'm excited to see who they cast as the other members of the Authority. Maybe we'll get to see a few more in Superman Legacy. Maybe not. Guys, let us know in the comments below. What do you think about this? The Authority is a movie that's going to be probably unlike any other movie that we have seen in the DC universe of movies, whether it's the DCEU, the new DCU, or like the previous DC projects prior to this whole shared cinematic universe world, because we have always sort of focused on Batman, Superman, and like the Justice League characters, whereas the Authority brings something very different to the table. And none of those characters are characters that you would like associate with traditionally with like the DC brand. So let us know in the comments what you think about this. Are you looking forward to the Authority? Is this the kind of movie that you want to see? And are you in love with the concept that John pitched, like this 80s, 90s commando, like Bad Bull? What was it? What was it? When First Blood or First Blood Part Two, like Rambo like esque movies, maybe Universal Soldier thrown in a little bit, or maybe even The Rock. But not the funny parts, but like like you get that access, like you said, or even like Blade Runner to a certain degree, like a lot of those Arnold Schwarzenegger movies from the 80s and 90s, where you just kind of like were wrecking mayhem, and like Terminator, Judgment Day. So yeah, let us know in the comments, and of course, guys, can check back here, guys and gals, everybody, just drop your comments, give us your topic ideas. We'll cover those here on DC Daily in the next few days, weeks, months, years to come. And then tomorrow, I believe we are talking about Paradise Lost, which is another project that's on the books for DCU, and it's going to be a TV series, a prequel to Wonder Woman. So we'll be going over that. It's going to be interesting. I'm sure we have some ideas. We have some speculation. We'll go into any piece of information that's already out there in the public eye, and then see how maybe that helps us speculate or gain some insight into what James Gunn has in mind for a Paradise Lost, and maybe even figure out whether Wonder Woman is going to be eventually part of the DCU. So we'll be talking all about that and so much more tomorrow. So make sure to check back here. We're live at 5:30 p.m. Eastern time on YouTube, Twitch, Twitter /X, and Facebook. And then you can, of course, once the show finishes airing, you can find us and the show through Instagram as well, on our website, osocurious.com. So we'll see you there on DCU Daily. And until tomorrow, John, thanks so much for joining the show, and we'll be back here soon. And we'll talk about Wonder
Oh,
Woman and
definitely.
Paradise Lost. All right.